For hosting the January frigid version of the Education Committee meeting, and congratulations on your impending retirement. It is easy to fail at retirement. First thing Jim Peterson said to me when I saw him last week was, "So, you failed at retirement again, too, huh?" Thanks, Jim. Yeah, well, we understand that. A couple of peripheral topics here right quick. Everybody's pretty much caught up on the bomb threat situation. This was at least a national, a regional event, if not a national one. The other odd thing that happened today too, which you'll hear about too, is there was a bank robbery this morning, and the suspect that was apprehended is the husband of a City High teacher. So they have a 2-month-old baby. I don't know what all's going on there, but that information is correct. So
interesting. I heard some weird sort of telephone version of connection between the bomb threat and the bank robbery.
Right. Yeah, that is dissipated, but it's been an odd day.
I have not been caught up on what's the deal with the bomb threat. Do you know?
Oh.
We need to stick to the agenda.
Yeah,
Well,
but it was a much larger event. It wasn't localized. So
All right.
anyway,
I'd be interested to hear.
yeah. May we have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
I move that we approve the minutes.
Do we have a second? Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. We're going to go ahead to the whatever it is Mary wants to talk about relative to Twain Elementary for a few minutes.
I have no passion about Twain.
So she's not retiring
When
after all.
When Tom said I had 10 minutes, I'm actually going to set my timer because I could literally talk like on and on about Twain. So I'll probably have to use this. But I picked this picture about Twain because last week we did a march, a dream march, and as the kids were learning about Martin Luther King and talking about his dream, one of our second graders said to a teacher, "Mrs. Med, we are the dream. This is the dream. Look, we all going to school together. We all respect each other. We all love each other. We're living the dream." And so that's what that sign it stands for. This is a dream. And at the end of this, I'll show you a little bit of the wonderful march. So if you don't know anything about Mark Twain, we have 2 preschools. One is a shared visions preschool where families can have their children come all day, and 16 of those spots are covered if low income, they qualify for that, and low income housing. 4 are, they can purchase those, or we often fill those spots too. We have 2, a morning and afternoon program for our preschool that the state sets up. We have 3 kindergarten classrooms this year, and what we're noticing with our kindergarten classroom and why it is larger than we think the rest of the classes is that this year we have a large number of our local neighborhood center kids coming to kindergarten. Probably 20 more than we've typically had. And I attribute that to the wonderful things that the staff is doing at this school. 8 years ago when I started, SINA was the new thing. Everyone got on buses and got the heavens out of Twain area. Well, now people are coming back, and we have 3 just outstanding kindergarten teachers. They have brought people in. So I see as we continue to grow at Mark Twain, we will continue to bring people back in, and this will truly become a neighborhood school that it once was. Yay. We have 2 first grade, second grade, third, fourth, and fifth grade classes, and we have 1 sixth grade class of 29 students. We have ELL, ELP, resource, and title here. So last year we had 420 kids. We had that wonderful portable in the back, and if you stay today, I want you to do the tour with me. You will see the amazing gym, art room, and music room that's been added, as well as knowing that we needed to hook our kindergarten parents, because we hook our kindergarten parents, they stay here. We really talked and designed 3 outstanding kindergarten classrooms. So they kind of showcase our building, get those folks in, and then we knew they would stay. 32% of our kids qualify for ELL, and that's not really true. We have 41, but we have some families who choose not to be in ELL. We also have some students who have passed out of ELL. So about 1 in every 3 children receive services in our ELL program. 80% of our kids now qualify for free and reduced lunch. That's an update from the October because we've got a lot of kids who have moved in, and the majority of children who move into Mark Twain during the school year usually qualify for free and reduced lunch. 49% of our students are white, 27 Hispanic, and 24 Black. That's a shift. Part of that had to do with Alexander. Our percentage increased in Hispanic. It decreased a little bit in Black, and so it added a little bit with white. And the white actually also has to do with our kindergarten classrooms. They aren't quite as diverse as our other grades. But regardless of all that, every single student in our building qualifies for an exceptional accelerated education. That's what we strive for here. Got a lot of barriers, and we know we have to get these kids over the barriers. So what does instruction look like? In reading and math, we start with core instruction. Core instruction is instruction that all children get. Then we do assessments, and we decide, do some kids need more? If a child needs more reading instruction, they'll be placed in a small group reading instruction, and it's targeted on what they need. So it might be a phonics issue, it might be a fluency issue, it might be building background issue. With our assessments, we decide what that targeted instruction will be, and a teacher in a small group setting teaches the children. If they don't continue to make progress or not accelerated enough, then we get to tier 3 intervention, and that really means a little more time and fewer children in that small group. If they still, then we have a team gets together and talks about other things we can do, possibly resource support, just other things that might be out there after all of that instruction. We look at the whole child here, and I think when Amy talks about Eli, I think that's going to be a challenge for us to not so focus on words per minute and making that benchmark, but that we're looking at the whole child, their social and emotional growth, as well as how are they as an artist and a scientist and a mathematician. So I think that's going to be our challenge. Our social emotional team is phenomenal. We have a lot of kids who come from trauma, so we have an SST team. We start with core instruction as PBIS. We are looking and making sure that we're giving kids who are following the rules positive reinforcement, but it doesn't start with tickets, people. It starts with teaching, like everything in here. So we teach our expectations. This is the way we're expected to walk down the hall. This is what lunchroom looks like. This is the way a classroom conversation with each other looks like. Everything goes back to teaching here. Some children, just like reading and math, need more support. So we give them tier 2 support. What that looks like is we have a behavior interventionist or a counselor. They might meet with the children. We might do a check-in, check-out program just to have another adult in that child's life to positively encourage them to stay on track. I meet with some kids weekly. We just kind of like mentors. We have actually peer mentors that we use that have been very, very successful. Because we want these kids to build relationships here, know that we care and love them, and that we will do whatever it takes to help them succeed in our school. Tier 3 is that we have family systems here, and if you're ever looking at different programs that are successful, the family systems at Mark Twain has been phenomenal. Children can get therapy on site. We do not take them out of instruction time. It's usually other different times of the day that you can find little pieces of time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And we have seen children, I can tell you a 5th grade, no, my time. I can tell you about a 5th grader who came to us from out of state. He was just being placed in not a BD program, a building for high need behavior children. He came here, We worked, we taught, we worked, we taught. Our resource teacher did a phenomenal job, and right now we're looking at staffing this child out. This child was going into a self-contained behavior program. This child will go to junior high probably with very little supports other than the people in the junior highs to help support him. So when you talk about changing lives in school, that child, I know in my heart, his life was changed by the supports that he got from the amazing staff that we have here at Twain. I'm like, okay, so reading. This is going to be about reading, so I wanted to focus on reading. So we are data driven. We're crazy about data, and our test scores are going up. We are all 4 grade levels. I know this in the big picture of Iowa City doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're in the 40s and now you're in the 60s at all 4 grade levels, you are jumping for joy and celebration. When I got those test scores this year in reading, I was very happy. Do we have ways to go? Of course we do. We know that. But we are going up. Behavior-wise, yay! Behavior-wise, not unfortunately,
So Mary, just on that graph, so that was grades, what?
3 through 6.
3 to 6,
Iowa
composite.
assessment, just in reading comprehension.
Okay, awesome, great.
Our behavior data has been phenomenal. Now, we lost 100 kids, so if you're talking about statistics, you're going to drop. You're going to drop because we've lost 100 kids. But we were already, if I would have done this, we were at 180. My first year here, we were like, I don't even want to tell you, I know that there were 90 suspensions written the year before. So we have been on a downward spiral for writing office referrals, and this year it's the lowest ever. We only have 52 office referrals. It is really the stuff that's going out right now about are we making sure that we are being fair to all kids. We look at that every month because we need to serve all children, and we are pretty even. Our percentages, we have right now, I know the data because I just looked at it, we have 18 white referrals, we have 16 black, we have 17 Hispanic. Does that match our percentage? No, it doesn't. So then we say, are we making sure we're doing the right thing for our Hispanic kids? Are we making sure that they feel safe and loved and cared for? Because that's what it all boils down to. If people know that you value them, you can really take that behavior to a whole another level. So we're very conscientious about that. So you're probably thinking, I had to put this in, Amy, sorry, but you're probably thinking, hey, we saw that Iowa report card and that Twain was at the bottom. So what's going on at Twain? Well, if you take the 20 schools for our composite scores, we're sitting around 15 or 16 in Iowa City out of the 20 elementary. We're not at the bottom. So why did we get a low score? Steve, you knew I was going to do this.
Sorry.
And this is why, people, because of that report card. 30%, 28.5% of that report card grade comes from closing the gap. And if you dig deep into that, you can see that Mark Twain, here are our gap kids. Well, we've increased the gap, but not a lot, and that's something that's really bothering us. But if you take a look at our non-gap kids, they have gone from 73%, 2 years later, we're at 86, almost 87%. So our non-gap group kids are making amazing growth. Why? Well, 2 years ago, we decided that our ELL students were really struggling with, and we wanted them to accelerate, and they weren't making that progress. So we started a program called SIOP, it's Sheltered Instruction, Observation Protocol, and it really is good teaching. It is about making sure kids are all engaged, having good conversations, being accountable, making sure everything that you teach them is accessible, really good strategies. And at this point, we know that those strategies are affecting our non-gap kids. We know that and wouldn't they? We don't send them out of the room when we teach, they're there too. What we really feel is that it's going to take a little bit longer for those ELL kids to catch on and to be very familiar and comfortable with those strategies. But already we are seeing just fabulous results from this strategy in teaching.
Well,
So
you were
we
like-
lost big points on that, by the way, on the report card. We lost. We got penalized because our gap kids and non-gap kids, the gap widened.
You were like this close to moving up to the next tier, right?
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Yep.
And I think it's important to know at the elementary level, there's 10 indicators that we're supposed to be being rated on, 8 of which we can be rated on. A couple of those are secondary related, so there's only 6 items that we're being rated on at the elementary level. 4 of the 6 go back to and only refer to the Iowa assessments. So Iowa assessments, I want to say, is almost impacting 85% of your score at the elementary level.
And you're the voice, the board's a voice for this too, because you hear this. If anyone was just sitting watching Channel 9 News, they see a score and go, oh, that Twain, what's going on to Twain? And we have people who came back from winter break that they heard comments in the community. And it is really, I feel, our job and your job is to educate the public about what this means, and that let's dig deeper and not just accept things for a score, for heaven's sakes. Another school, very similar to Twain, the non-gap kids actually dropped to 71. They bumped up to the next level because they closed the gap. So think about that.
I mean,
Mary, can
isn't
you
it also true
explain
that-
what
I'm
the
sorry.
gaps is? I'm sorry.
You betcha. So non-gap schools, the non-gap group, well, let's take the gap group. The gap group are students that are ELL students, that are special ed students, and that qualify for free and reduced lunch.
Okay.
The gap kids are everybody, or non-gap kids are everybody else.
Now, it's a different attendance area this year than it was last year, right?
We have all of our same kids, but 100 kids. It's not different, and
It's
we have,
not, didn't we put some of Twain into Alexander, or no?
yeah, we took 100
was.
kids that are in
Right.
Alexander.
Yeah.
It's a smaller attendance.
Actually, 80 kids.
So do they take into account the fact that you don't have the same set of kids?
Oh,
when they're
heavens,
measuring
no. No. And that's the same with our data,
That
but I
makes
will tell you
sense.
this, Chris, is that we are very conscientious about what we call full academic year kids. So when I looked at the data for Iowa assessments, I looked last year and this year, and I wanted to say, hey, let's say we have 80 kids that leave, were 50 out of those 80 like below proficiency? That would affect our data. And actually, the kids that went to Alexander from Twain actually were a pretty even group of children. There were children who were below proficiency, and there were children who were above. And it was pretty.
Do you do anything to actually take the kids who you know were here last year and this year and see how their improvement looks? What the percentiles were from one year to the next? Or,
Say that again.
you could look at the kids who were here and they were here last year too.
Oh, that's exactly what we do. That's
Yeah,
what full
and you could-
academic year
yeah,
means.
yeah.
You betcha. We look at the kids that we've had. Heavens, we take those tests in October. We had 4 kids in our 5th grade who walked in August. So and they didn't attend an Iowa City school. So anyway, I'm over my time, so I'm sorry.
If
but
I can build
here-
on just one, I think this is a good future agenda item. I don't think it's the most
Which one?
important. Just
The
the
gap?
Iowa scorecard.
Okay.
Because we can influence the Department of Education, right? I know there's a number of things.
Well,
we've talked
and
about.
Latasha asked a good question about who the gap kids are, because the state's already acknowledged that an error that they made is race and ethnicity was not considered. And then the other concern we have with the gap group is whichever distinction you have, you're an ELL child, you're a child that's eligible for free and reduced lunch, you're a special ed kid, you get thrown into the mix, but it's not disaggregated based on that particular issue that is a barrier to your learning. They're all
Yeah.
aggregated together.
Right.
And so we can't tell from their measurement, based on their concerns, are our ELL kids progressing? Are our
Right.
special ed kids progressing? Are our FRL kids progressing? I mean, if you really want to use this diagnostically to ask about where there are opportunities for us, this provides us none of that information.
Well, and what you just talked about would answer about 20 of our questions about the annual performance report, right? I mean, so. Anyway, I agree with the point. We need to educate the community, but then we can also influence the DE,
Nice.
Great.
Right.
So I'm out of time, so I just wanted to share one last thing. So, this is our march. So the second graders wrote persuasive writing, persuasive pieces to encourage people to join the march. And they're all carrying signs, and we did that on Friday. And my favorite was "We are the future" on one of the signs, because that's what we are dealing with every day. You know, we have the future in our hands every day. So, oh, that's my Twain. How am I leaving it? I don't know.
We don't know either.
I don't know. But anyway, does anyone have any questions?
So if there's 2 or 3 things you'd reapply across the district, based on what you just said, what would they be?
Number one, we didn't get to where we are without additional support at Twain. So I think my number one thing is, I get fearful when our behavior data goes down and people go, well, they don't need a behavior interventionist, their data looks great. It's gone down because we've had
Because of the
people
support, yeah.
to do that. I
Mary,
think
those
that.
are only the referrals out to on our behavior data, and our behavior interventionist also does so much work with classroom teachers so that you can manage it
But,
within the classroom so they don't get to that point. And so I think that's another important thing to consider.
I'm a data-driven person, and I think we all are, but I think, here's my other thing, I'm just gonna say it, is that one of the things that worries me in the future is that we are losing sight of children. We instead are looking at kids as being red or green, and if they make the benchmark, and that is a really scary thought for me, because these children who are, as you're gonna talk about, possibly be retained, that's a stigma that they will have, you know, forever. And man, we just can't let that happen. We've gotta look at the whole child and recognize that strength means a lot of things, not just how fast you can read a passage.
A little bit of a question. So when the kids qualify for these higher level interventions, tier 2, tier 3, whatever, either reading or behavior or whatever, what are the other kids doing when these kids are doing those interventions? What are they missing?
Sure, okay, so let's take a look at tier 2 in behavior. It's check in, check out, okay? Check in, check out means we know that kids, the more connections they have, positive connections at school, there's a real increase in the chance that their behavior will, they won't have as many problems. So check in, check out means that child is gonna come in the morning, an adult's gonna meet with them, they're gonna talk about their goals, they're gonna ask them about how their day was, talk about their goals, they're gonna, have the sheet in front of them and say, good luck, I know you can do it, they're gonna send them on the way, at the end of the day, they're gonna meet with them. So that's not taking away instructional time. We use a lot of kind of a combination, so for example, every teacher knows there's when you come in from recess, there's some settling down time. So we might take some time at that point, 20 minutes of time, to do some small group instruction during that time. The reading interventions all happen in the hour reading block. So a child who's just needs core, they're going to get 20 minutes of small group instruction. A child who's in tier 2, they're going to get 20 and possibly 20 more minutes. So one might be on reading strategies and the other one might be targeted instruction in phonics. If a child is on tier 3 and really needs intense instruction, they may do 30 minutes of guided reading and 30 minutes of 95% group, which is phonics focused. And so they're getting 60 minutes of face-on-face time with an instructor on teaching reading. So it's, okay, so what are the other kids doing? They're doing writing activities, they're doing more independent activities during that time, reading independently. So they're all reading, but they're just getting different levels of support during that hour. Anything else?
Okay.
Just,
Sorry, Tom.
if we could, I'd just like, Mary, thank you for your leadership
Yeah.
at Twain, and the results are outstanding. But thank you and your staff. I mean, I think it's been transformational here the last few years from what I can see. And that's, and you showed it in the results. But I think we could feel it before the results came, right? And it's just great to feel it and then see the results actually come. And I think you're right, it's just at the beginning. So thank you and your staff for everything you've done here. And thanks to the Twain community. I think it's a case study in embracing their neighborhood school and, like you say, really bringing the neighborhood back. So it's great that you've been able to make that happen kind of naturally, you know what I mean?
Thank
Versus-
you.
So thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and I am so sorry. I went over.
We're-
You knew I would, Tom.
We just can't keep the lid on the time on this
I'll go
meeting.
over a little bit because I
So
think
sorry.
that is the PSYOP that Mary talked about. I got a chance to visit with one of your teachers to see the PSYOP model kind of in action, and I don't have very many ELL students at Longfellow, but I agree that the model of looking at the language objectives and then the content objectives helps all the kids, and so I think that's something that we can build on as a district too, is just getting that model out there for helping kids.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Mary. For the next sections, you're going, who's doing the heavy lifting?
I'm
Amy?
doing the heavy
Amy
lifting.
gets to do it.
I'm gonna
Okay.
have some help though, hopefully from these counterparts over here. So tonight, whoops, I already can't move this.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, here.
This is the old-fashioned way.
Next. Okay, so tonight, we're gonna cover 3 topics, which in and of it themselves, I think we could easily spend an hour on each, so I'm trying to be cognizant of time. Talk a little bit more about reading achievement tonight, and then instruction. Mary's touched upon this already with core and interventions. No, it was perfect. And then really get into the meat of what that early literacy legislation looked like and the impact that it's having here locally. Someone has not,
Yeah. That's okay, let me click.
Okay. So I put, we've pulled our 2015, our fall 2015 Iowa assessment data, and we just were able to do this at the end of last week. The other thing that I'm gonna start passing out is just more data that I didn't wanna have the slideshow be super long. But this shows the average national standard score for grades 3 through 6, and then the next slide is gonna show 7, 8, and then we'll finish with 9 through 11. But what you can see here is that in the colored lines are what our district averages are looking like, and the black lines are what the national averages are looking like. So as I look at that for where we've been at the elementary, we're doing a nice job of outperforming the national average in grades 3 through 6. And this goes back to 2011, so between 2011 to date. Our 4th grade outperforms the 5th grade national average, and our 5th grade outperforms the 6th grade national average. And it's all trending upward. I think that's exciting to look at. If we move on to junior high, we're seeing the same thing here, that we're outperforming the national average with those national standard scores. And again, our trend would be moving upwards. And then if we move to the high school, still outperforming the national average quite considerably there. I think the thing that we need to look into and be a little bit concerned about is what's happening with our 11th graders. You know, back in 2011, 2012, pretty high performing, and then we've seen a dip and then stay at that level since 2013 or so. So I don't know if the assessment would have changed. I don't know that I've heard that.
I
But
think the assessment changed in that year, and then so the initial conversations we've had there is, okay, something didn't change with our instruction at that point to align to know, you know, with if the assessment's going to assess for these things, obviously that we have a mismatch there in what's happening. Our students just didn't all of a sudden stop performing as well, but something happened with what they're assessing and how it's in line with our instruction. So there is a difference there. We need to dig into as we looked at this.
So that's one way to look at reading achievement in Iowa assessments and looking at kind of where we've been historically. Another way is same way that we did last week, which is to look at where what our proficiency levels look like. And again, to not bog the presentation down, I've included the last 5 years here for each of our grade levels, percent proficient. What you have in your hand is, and it's pretty tiny, I know, is I've broken it down, not only giving you again the all students, but then I've broken it down by subgroup: low SES, IEP, ELL, African American, Asian, Hispanic, white. There's other subgroups I could have pulled as well. These are the major ones that I go back to. I mean, we've got some information on migrant, male, female, that kind of thing. But it took us quite a bit just to put this information in the tables in the last few days. So I thought that this was interesting to look at as well. Remember, this is not full academic year. That wouldn't be pulled out of this data, so this is all of our students. The other thing about percent proficient is the way Iowa Assessment categorizes kiddos is you're either non-proficient, proficient, or advanced. And so when I talk about those proficiencies, I'm combining that proficient and advanced columns. And then the scores are slightly up, or I would say steady when you look at all of our students. We can drill down into our subgroup data and see that with certain subgroups we certainly have work to do. And like Matt and I spoke about last week, we know that our lowest 3 subgroups over time tend to be special education, our ELL kiddos, and our African American kiddos. And I think as you look through this, you're going to see the same thing. You know, you can go to different subgroups and have findings for particular years. There's some things that you get surprised about. You know, as I'm working through, we tend to see those higher scores at the upper grades, and is that indicative because they've been in our system longer? It's hard to tell with this data because we don't know what that full academic year data looks like compared to that. Then some other data that's new for us to look at this year would be our FAST assessment data. And in the past, the like screener that we would have used, and most of you are probably familiar with if you've had elementary kiddos, would have been that Dibble screener. Later, as I talk about early literacy, I'll talk more about why we needed to make this move to FAST. But in the fall, we tested our kindergartners, and there's 4 sub-tests in FAST that they took at the time, and they're compiled and they're each weighted differently. But at that time, 66% of our kids were proficient. I would say in my experience last year at Linn-Mar, when that first set of proficiencies came out, the teaching staff really felt like it wasn't maybe the truest picture of the learners at the time, that they just hadn't been in school very much, and that if they would have tested later in the window, that maybe the amount of kids wouldn't have been as proficient. I don't know if we feel that way in Iowa City as well, but it'll be interesting just to watch these proficiencies then over time. So district-wide, we had about 66% of our kids proficient. And then in first grade, yeah, we'll just kind of flip through these fast. I did some screenshots from Iowa too. This is where the data sits. We had 51%. Second grade, 60%. And then third grade, 64%. If you back up to second grade, those second grade scores that we are showing, roughly about 60% of the kids were proficient. That's a group we're going to want to keep our eye on if indeed we need to carry through with the offering of summer school retention. And I'll talk more later that you're not just non-proficient one time to be considered substantially deficient, which are the kids that would be needing to be going to summer school or retain. I'll talk about that later, but that's the group that we're going to have to look at for the first time if something doesn't happen with the legislature this spring. And then I think that's it that I brought for the data piece. Just have any
FAST
questions
stands for
about-
what?
Oh, gosh.
If you don't know either, then you're on.
Oh, I should know this.
You know, Beth?
Oh, I can Google it really fast. No, it's Fast Bridge.
I have it written down in my room because I knew someone would
It's
ask
an
me
acronym,
something.
huh?
Yeah.
It's an acronym.
Although they do have to be fast.
They do.
Can you tell us about that? Because I've had some parents ask me about this test that seems to really emphasize speed to the point where kids are discouraged from stopping and trying to think about a word. They're off just skipping that word so they can get more words in. Is that what they're talking about here?
Yeah, a little bit, and I'd have to allow Beth to speak to that, but yeah, we continue to see as the benchmarks grow kind of exponentially as you go throughout the year, and some of the benchmarks that we see are unlike benchmarks for a particular time of year for a particular grade that is unlike what we've seen before. What FAST will say, or FastBridge Company, is that these goals or benchmarks are unique to this particular assessment, so that you wouldn't necessarily apply the same benchmark criteria to any given passage. And so a lot of people would have, using the BRI or Hasbrook and Tyndall norms, they would be considerably less words per minute than you would see on these assessments.
Why is words per minute the thing we're after?
Well, the answer from FastBridge is that the research would say that if the kids can, if they have correct words per minute on the passage that they're reading, that's pretty indicative of whether they're going to comprehend the passage. I think they say at like 97%. If they can hit the target, then there's a strong enough correlation there that they would comprehend as well.
Can we just test comprehension?
Well, there's a research piece that talks about the automaticity of reading too, and that when kids are automatic with their reading, it frees up that cognitive space for the comprehension. So when they're reading, if they're so hung up on decoding, if they never get that automaticity, they're never going to move forward to be able to really deal with comprehension. That's what the research talks about there. And it stands for Formative Assessment System for Teachers.
In the second part, and then I left.
I know, it's just that the parents who complained to me about it they're worried about the lesson that the kids are taking
Absolutely.
from this enterprise of just trying to read as fast as they can and skipping stuff if they can't do it.
And the passages are all fiction. Lots of times we'll make a pointed effort to talk about when they're reading fiction passages that they should be purposefully slowing down their reading because they're going to be encountering that informational text and vocabulary that they haven't encountered before. Same can be true, I said, I guess, for the fiction as well, but it's part of the process. In K and 1, we don't see that. In first grade, mid-year, so this winter benchmark, they'll have the passage for the first time. At the beginning of the year, one of their 4 subtests was just sentence reading. So it's not until 2nd and 3rd grade do they solely just have these 1-minute passages that they're reading, 3 1-minute passages that they're reading. So we're gonna, now that we're bringing 4th through 6th grade on as well, they'll be getting 3 1-minute passages. So our K and 1 have a little bit different assessment look than our 2nd through what will be 6th graders.
I'm going to get ahead of you, but you're saying then that this is replacing Dibbles?
Yes.
And is this the thing that is going to determine proficiency for purposes of 3rd grade retention, or is it Iowa assessment?
So I think that's hasn't been clearly defined yet. In the last year and a half, we've heard them talk a little bit about whether we would use a standardized assessment, and then they haven't been real forthcoming on that. This summer, there's going to be guidance released around summer school and retention that's going to be more specific to that. What we did see with the November release and guidance was that we're going to be looking at the winter benchmark next year. And so when I think about looking at the winter benchmark and how kids are performing, we will not have given the Iowa assessment again because statewide we're supposed to all be moving to a spring assessment. And so then if we're saying that that winter benchmark is the period, will it just come to fruition that it is only this FAST assessment?
Does it seem like the numbers for proficiency are lower under the FAST and under the Iowa assessments?
It does seem like they're a little bit lower. Yep.
Okay.
And we do have other measures, not necessarily for the purpose of determining 3rd grade retention, but this is not the only assessment we do with children.
Sure.
We do the DRAs, we do running records, we do observations. So when we talk with parents, we have a convergence of data. We don't just talk about something like this.
Mhm.
And comprehension is a huge part of that.
That's what's, I think, been difficult for any district that's encountering this. I think most districts, all districts I've been in, and I would guess most throughout the state, want to talk to parents about that convergence of data because one single assessment doesn't paint the whole picture on the child. And so while we've tried to have that conversation for years with our teachers about when they go to report to parents to be thinking about all these things, now we've got this high stakes piece and we've kind of had to pull back from that language with our teachers because we certainly don't want to be meeting with parents and talking about their child being at risk or substantially deficient and then on a report card or in a different notion saying, oh, but they're fine. You know, it's really made this rather high stakes for us. Okay, I'm going to move on, if there's no other questions about scores, into literacy instruction. I thought it was important to include the just the instructional minutes per day, because this is, I think, where it starts. And I know that there's a little bit of a rub, and we've talked about this lately, about dictating, you know, so much with our teaching staff. I think the thing to be cognizant about is if we don't set out a sort of framework for them, then we would have no ability. We would have nothing to say for a teacher that didn't want to, you know, spend 5 hours in science and spend 20 minutes in math and 20 minutes in literacy. So we do try to paint that picture about roughly what our day looks like. And if you just look at language arts across the top there, we're spending roughly 2.5 hours a day in language arts in our 7-hour day. That's important because to be able to also work through the curriculum and the assessments, we need a huge chunk of time. And at the elementary level, it's, and I would even make the case for K-12. I think, teaching kids to read is probably the most important thing that we're doing district-wide, so.
And secondary wise, I think you'd see a similar focus on language arts. The fact we have language arts and literacy course for our junior high students, so 2 of their 8 periods per se are spent in that area too. So trying to, again, to Amy's point there about the focus in that area.
And in that 2.5 hours, there's roughly an hour of whole group instruction that's happening. So about a half hour around just reading, whether it's the whole group story. So everybody's getting grade level material during that half hour. It's grade level text, it's comprehension skills, it's fluency skills, it's things that they need to be working on. Another half hour, not necessarily in this order, that's also whole group, would also be grammar, spelling, writing, that kind of thing. Another hour then is spent in small group instruction that's differentiated based on their level or their needs. And then we've got that extra half hour where there still could be some of that small group that looks like core instruction happening because maybe the class size is 30 or so kids and you just need that many more groups. Some of our buildings have started to use that last half hour chunk as additional intervention time. So in that 2.5 hours, we might steal some time to do the core, differentiated instruction, whole group instruction, and more for intervention. There's also a time in our day where you'll see where it says intervention block that there's roughly 20 minutes or so. That's another time of day where direct instructions should be stopping, that we should be extending or remediating students. We've had a little bit of a discussion as an elementary principal team and coaches about what we might consider doing with those 20 minutes. If you look at math, roughly 60 minutes or so spent each day on math. We've talked about trying to maybe stick to the 2.5 hours for literacy and then push math about to 75 minutes. And with the thought that we do our math, and I know tonight's not about math, but do our all of our math, whether that's whole group or small group, in that first 60 minutes, and then have 15 minutes designated to intervention. And when I say intervention, I want it to mean remediation or extension. So there's no new direct instruction happening, but it's all either being remediated or extended. So that's the conversation that we're having to try to bump the math minutes, especially when you have a new math program, when we're asking teachers to do more and to provide interventions themselves, because not all these kids that are getting these extra interventions can go to a title teacher or a support teacher or to the resource teacher. We've got to show our teaching staff then where in their day that this makes sense to do it. So that's where those kinds of conversations are happening right now.
Is there any expectation or hope for away from school? How much time kids might be reading or?
I think that would be building-based decisions if that's happening.
And I wonder if that's not something we could work with the community on.
Absolutely.
30 minutes reading. I don't know if it's 20 or 30 or what the number is, but.
The rule of thumb usually is 10 per grade. I don't know if they still follow that. So first grader 10, second grader 20, yeah, up to an hour as a sixth grader. So
I think it's important. I've definitely had these conversations with building leadership teams here and in previous districts about, when certain grade levels tend to have an expectation, and then you move on as that parent, and the next grade level doesn't have that same sort of expectation or has a lesser expectation, that's hard. So I'm always encouraging buildings, whatever that expectation is, make sure you're kind of thinking about it as a staff, and that next year that ante is up to just a little bit. And whether that's we're going to read so many minutes a day or so many books this year, I think that's important. I've certainly had that experience as a parent myself, kind of having that letdown after you've seen all the good things that were happening the prior year. So I think you're right, Chris, that the community, when they're interested, these would be easy things for us to turn around.
And I wonder about, and we don't need to solve tonight, but hardwiring parents, grandparents, the community into our strategic plan, probably 10 minutes a night would be, and maybe a cap out somewhere, I don't know, but some easy benchmark where you just set that as a goal or a hope or whatever.
I think there's a lot of agencies that would help support that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
United Way.
Partnering with the library.
Yeah.
Public library would be is this a time to bring in some discussion on summer reading or?
Could be. I mean, why don't we, let's
Yeah.
say that I think this is an important point, and maybe Amy goes through and then we come back and talk
Sure.
about.
Because summer will come up with Eli.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Okay, so Chris has asked me to try to emulate a little bit of the conversation that he and Andy had at Coralville Central, and Andy shared with me, they talked about 15 minutes about core instruction versus intensive. But if you look at the pyramid here, and what I loved about finding this online was that it both had the academic side as well as the behavioral side. Mary did a nice job of already talking about this in her presentation, that every child gets tier 1, whether that's behavioral support or academic curriculum. So for us, that tier 1 support is Harcourt, Houghton Mifflin with our Journeys series. And then and we expect or hope that that reaches about 80% of our kids, or 80% of our kids are proficient. We know building to building, some people are meeting that and some people aren't. So then we move on to tier 2 or tier 3 supports, and really tier 2 means on either side, the behavior side or the academic side, that the kids are getting core instruction plus more. That might be a small group, 15 minutes up to 30 minutes a day, maybe 3 to 5 days a week. If we don't see the children having success in tier 2, then we're going to bump them to tier 3, which means they get core instruction, tier 1, plus tier 3, not tier 2 as well. But tier 3 looks more individualized, could be one-on-one, longer period of time, 20 to 30 minutes, and most likely 5 days a week. So when you think of some of our different programs, I think an example of reading recovery, that's pretty intensive. You've got a half hour a day for a first grader every day of the week, one-on-one. And then the same can be true on the behavior side. And PBIS, you've heard us talk about before, is really our core program, tier 1. And Mary talked a little bit about how they support kids that might need tier 2 support or tier 3 support. But if your system is working well and is healthy, they talk about 80% of your students should be proficient if core is on target. About 15% of your population needing that tier 2 intervention, and about 5% needing tier 3. We know that we don't fit this perfectly. In fact, some of our buildings, have that triangle inverted, so we've got work to do there. But again, I would just say, like Mary said, they've gotten a lot of support, whether that's Title I or some funding, but a lot of our buildings are using their extra staff support to get to the kids' interventions at that tier 2 and tier 3 level. And that's critical, but it's also critical for our classroom staff to know that we don't have necessarily enough resources, and so that we have to find time in the day that some of our classroom teaching time has to be devoted to this work as well. So moving on to the next slide. So again, in literacy, we use Journeys, our Houghton Mifflin Harcourt series. And then just a couple of examples of our tier 2 and tier 3 interventions. I mentioned reading recovery at first grade. The bottom right is our Fontes and Pinnell LLI kits.
Is that the 95% stuff?
That's not, but in that phonological awareness screener for intervention, that PASI is 95% group materials. And this has taken a strong foothold, and Beth and Mary might have more of a history on it, but what we've seen, because of what we've had to do with Eli this year in the FAST testing, we also have to code all of our students that are getting support to an intervention in Iowa tier. And we've got well over 50 interventions in there, several of which happen to come out of 95% group, but they're materials that are newer to the district. But I think right away we knew that there was a need with phonemic awareness or phonics. And I still have, in talking with people, and just my own gut is saying, I really don't know how much of we've got a student issue, we know in those areas, but I also think we have a curricular issue in that area. I think if we could pair kindergarten and maybe first grade with a strong phonics piece in core, that we might not need to reach as many kids with the 95% group materials. But I think our teaching staff has loved it. When I look at those interventions, it makes my stomach hurt a little bit, because in knowing the interventions that we have out there, not all buildings have access to every intervention that's listed in Iowa tier. And then along with that, even if we could start to purchase some of those things, there's also the professional development, and to get both pieces to happen is a struggle especially with having not enough time to be up in front of our staff just to begin with. But 95% group has been hugely popular. What I did do with using some of the Eli funds this year is I pulled the buildings and asked them, of all these 95% group materials, who had what? And then I started at the very top with this passage screener. I think 12 of the buildings had it. So it's a kindergarten phonemic awareness screener. And I filled in the holes with the remaining 8, and we're going to have, with the coaches and principals, beginning of February, a little training on it just to get everybody on the same playing field. So that's one thing I've done, but there's, again, just a long list of interventions that not everybody has. But you guys want to say anything about 95% group? Because I know that Corvallis Central has a lot of groups and things to say.
We've attributed a lot of our growth with students, especially in the lower grades. It's just really strengthening those phonological awareness and phonics skills. It's kind of like building a foundation for strong readers. We have to start there before we can move forward. And materials are very, very effective and targeted.
Do you feel like you have the materials you need, or you want more, or?
We do right now. I think we do right now. We could always, I think we're okay right now. Let's put it that way. I think as we learn more about the possibilities with 95% group and learn more about those, it'd be nice to have additional materials.
We've got, sorry.
What about in other areas of reading intervention?
I'm sorry.
What about in other areas of reading intervention? Do we have the materials we need?
We do. We have the LOI kits all the way up to grade 5 to 6.
We can use,
enough.
we don't have enough
Stacy.
of those, so we have
Yeah.
teachers sharing those.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
And that's always. No, we don't. Yeah.
We don't. We have
Everything
many
I'm-
teachers sharing, and we've actually borrowed a
Don't
little
have
bit.
enough what again?
The LLI sets,
The bottom right.
so we have teachers sharing those, and that's kind of, that's inconvenient. You have people who are
One
going
is-
back and forth out of boxes with materials.
Yeah, particularly the
And one nice
lower
thing
level
about this
ones.
is that they can go home with parents too. The books the kids read, they go home, and we've had a lot of success in Twain when parents getting on board with those.
Sign-up money's been interesting this year. They've really discouraged, we used to be able to use quite a bit of our sign-up money to purchase materials, and that filled in the gap for some of these kinds of things. But this year, they're really frowning on us buying materials and would rather us use it for professional development. So it makes it a little bit different, trying to get materials in people's hands.
The one thing that I think Chris heard from Andy was that they're building one like more of those phonics lesson libraries from
Yes.
95%
Oh, yes.
group, and they are $1,000 each, and so.
Oh, they're more than that. The basic is $1,800.
Okay.
So it's upwards of 2,000 once you pay
Just for
shipping and
one.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
just for one.
And he said that they would need like one per grade level.
Yeah.
not per
We
teacher
share that.
necessarily.
We have a system set up, but it would be wonderful to have more. As far as the LOI goes, Stacy was referring to the take-home books, and those we've been able to purchase with title funds, but of course, those seem to shrink every year too. So, always, they're those black and white books, not a big deal if they get lost, but funding is just huge. I mean, the sky's the limit for what we can really do.
So if there's a wish list, I know there's a wish list. Chris asked us in the last meeting. So we gotta move on, we're gonna talk here, but, and not that we will finish it here tonight, but if there was, so I'm looking at aim elementary across the board. If there was a wish list on whether it's core or intervention, what would it be in terms of staffing and materials and everything else? And again, you don't need to answer it now, but I think that's the strategic plan part of it. And I get it, there's only a fixed buy, maybe we're just moving things around, but the question for us is what can we do? Now, maybe it's incremental funding, maybe it's categorical, maybe there's different things we can go get at. Maybe it's helping us paint the picture with the legislature. It's like, if you gave me more money, I'd go get this stuff to help kids read. Or maybe there's things we control, transportation costs, this, that, the other thing that we can do to help, fund that.
I think my gut, and I know didn't ask me to answer right now, my gut is that we want a strong core. And I feel like this year in particular, because of Eli being rolled out, we just haven't gotten to even focus our discussion very much around core. We've focused around interventions, but honestly, we need discussion around both, and that goes back to just being able to have time and access in front of our staff as well.
That's what I was gonna interrupt her with, is I think that's where we need some real conversation around. I mean, we can buy all the materials and we can help all the things, but if we can't spend the time with the staff to actually come up with a plan to implement those. I mean, Amy talked a little bit about the math curriculum and being able to, to struggle with the time in front of our teachers to effectively be trained and implement that in their classrooms. I mean, that's just a real struggle I think we have. So as we take on those additional interventions, I mean, it does take time and support for teachers to know, you know, didn't feel good about going back to their students.
Well, sure, I guess the core's strong enough to don't even get to intervention,
Right.
but I love what you said too about taking your intervention learnings and building it back into the core, right?
Absolutely.
So we don't need to solve it, but if we were to come back with what are the needs? And I know we're not gonna solve world hunger like overnight, but it would help us, I think, paint the picture and
Sure.
have a conversation about focus and priorities and everything else.
We can do that. Okay, so the last piece I'll move into is Eli, and there's a ton of slides, so I'm gonna talk fast. I'll give you a little bit about the history, Iowa Department of Ed guidance, legal requirements, and then just our work this last year. So back in 2012, the educational reform legislation was passed, but it included an early literacy component. But there were fiscal triggers built in there, so nothing got enacted because those fiscal triggers didn't happen. But in the 2013 legislative session, they appropriated $8 million. And so after that legislative session, the DE got real busy between the summer and winter to try to figure out what they needed to put in place. And so in December, or through that fall, nope, this is fine. In November, we saw the first notice of intended action in 2013. By December, there was roughly a 12-page document that had the initial guidance, and then you can just kind of follow along. In August of 2014, I think that guidance that was released was 26 pages. It replaced the 12-page document. And then just in November, they released a 35-page document. And, oh, by the way, another one just last month. So that I know the November one inside and out. That's where I've spent most of my time recently. That was 35 pages long. And then they had a companion piece of appendices. That document's about 49 pages long. So they have, and to their credit, they've just had to answer so many questions along the way. There's about 23 rules there, and you can imagine the kinds of questions that they've taken around each of those items. That over time, as they've pushed information out via webinars, different emails, they've just tried to continue to compile that information. So I am appreciative of it, even though it sounds like they're rather lengthy documents. They are good for us to go back to. There's a lot of repetition in them, which I don't mind either because I can read it 10 times and it just helps it to sink in. That initial funding application happened in December of 2013. And so each year we've been granted roughly about $120,000 around Eli. So out of that $8 million pot, Iowa City's getting about $120,000. In January of 2014, they pushed out a list of approved assessments and did a survey for districts. And then in June of 2015, they looked at this approved list again to see if they were going to make any changes. And as Iowa City was studying that last year, and I think because of what we were doing around OCR, we stuck with the DIBELS. And if you look at that, those approved assessment lists, DIBELS is on there, but it's not on there for all of the grades that we need to assess. And so last year it was missing for kindergarten. We were able to use it for 1st through 3rd grade. Doesn't make sense in our system not to have assessment that you can look at vertically. So as I just think back to when I first stepped into the job in July, Becky came to me and said, we need to make a decision on kindergarten, and if we're making a decision on kindergarten, we need to consider whether we just want to take this K-3. So in July and August, we made the decision to go K-3 and have everybody, because the other component that we're looking at that is your progress monitoring piece. So when your kids are non-proficient and you have to progress monitor them weekly, that also has to be an approved assessment. And as we took a look at that list, K2 DIBELS is on there as an approved assessment, but not the 3rd grade DIBELS. So it just didn't make sense. So we went K3 with the FAST, which is in line with what most districts in the state of Iowa did the year before. I think there was only roughly like 30 districts that didn't pick it up. So it was good that we came aboard, and I think overall their teaching staff has actually liked the change, and I can't speak for every single one of them, but really overall we don't have a ton of complaints around that switch. And then just they've held lots of webinars. They have a nice site on the DE webpage that helps keep us up to date. You want to go to the next? Okay. And so this is just a picture of what that page looks like, just right in the middle.
That's a magic touch.
Okay, so this is a picture of that updated guidance talked about. This also sits on the DE webpage, the list of approved literacy assessments. They talk about how they were vetted. And so I'm going to touch upon some of those 23 rules or requirements. Again, we've talked a little bit about this already, that you have to use in kindergarten through 3rd grades a universal screening measure that's from their approved list. You have to look at the vendor benchmarks for what they deem as proficient. And we attest most of our students. There's very few students that do not have to take this assessment. One example would be those students whose IEP indicates that this assessment is not appropriate. This is just an example or a screenshot of when we go into Iowa Tier, what it looks like. And so Iowa Tier, I've referenced a little bit already. Iowa Tier is where the FAST assessment is housed. Not only in Iowa Tier do we house the FAST assessment, but we house all those interventions that I talked about. The nice thing about it is it's kind of a one-stop shop. We can go there for our universal screener for FAST. We can go there to get our FAST progress monitoring instrument. We can go there to attach the intervention to the student. And then all of this displays nice summary reports, graphs on individual students, graphs on the class. We can look at district data. We can disaggregate by subgroups. And so the system is becoming more robust over time. Iowa Tier in its infancy couldn't do all of those things, but they've continued to build it along the way. The one thing that I think we'll be able to do, and not only just locally but statewide, is take a look at, over time, where are we having success? Which interventions are giving us the most success? I don't think that having necessarily 50 interventions or so listed in Iowa Tier is the ultimate goal. I think having a few solid interventions that are working is our ultimate goal. This is just a quick snapshot of about how much time a teacher would spend given the assessment. I talked earlier that in 2nd and 3rd grade, the kids get 3 one-minute passages. And at K and 1, it takes a little bit longer because they've got 4 subtests each. Beth, roughly 7-8 minutes maybe to test a student.
At the most.
This is an example of a nonsense word subtest. And then this is an example of that passage. And again, they do 1 minute. So after 1 minute, they'll stop if they're not through the passage. And then this is where the benchmarks come in. The benchmarks have changed slightly during the course of last year. They changed kindergarten spring benchmarks. At the beginning of this year, did they push out new benchmarks?
I don't know for all grades. I know there were new benchmarks for some.
And the benchmarks are built right into the system. So right away as you're testing the student, you get a reading on whether they're hitting the benchmarks or not. Also interesting to note is that in kindergarten, you can see depending on the time of year which assessment is given. So in the fall, concepts of print, onset sounds, letter names, and letter sounds are given, but they're all not given the same amount of weighting when they get a composite score. So that composite score for kindergarten in the fall is 40, but they weight concepts of print and onset sounds heavier, letter names and letter sounds lower. If you fast forward to the spring, they're going to take an assessment. Letter sounds is the only one that carries through all 3 testing periods. Then they'll go to word segmenting, nonsense, decodable words, and sight words, and they're all, weighted a little bit differently. And so you can see over time, with this look, how each subtest is weighted and which subtest is given at which time of year.
The composite score is what determines the if you need to do interventions. We still use this data though to drive our instruction. So even if a child is green, we might get some information that onset sounds are still something they need to work on. So we'll go back and use this data.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, so this is the terminology that we're all getting used to, and not necessarily terminology we want to use with our parents. If substantially deficient happens to be the language in the law, but we don't think that that's the most favorable term necessarily to be using with our parents. So when we assess students, they're either coming out as appropriately progressing, they're meeting the benchmark, at risk, or substantial deficiency. And I'll show you how they get to that. So if a student meets the benchmark, here's some examples. On the previous screening period and the next period, they're still at or above the benchmark. You're not at risk. No other action is required. If you met the benchmark during the previous screening window, But now you're below the benchmark, now you are considered at risk, and weekly progress monitoring is required. So they've been non-proficient one time, and so it kicks in the fact that we need to weekly progress monitor. We think it's best practice if we can provide intervention as well, but according to the law, we're needing to progress monitor at that point. So if you're a student who's appropriately progressing, the expectations would be that you are given the universal screener 3 times a year. We started today in the second universal screening period, the winter window. It's open today until February 12th. Progress monitoring is not required. Your instruction would be that universal tier, that would be that Journeys curriculum. And then parent notice would just, the expectation is just what your district has adopted. Conferences, report cards, phone calls, just things that we would typically do. So if you're identified as at risk on the previous universal screening assessment, that means you missed proficiency for the first time, and that you are at or above the benchmark, then you're no longer considered at risk. But if you've been at risk and you're not at the benchmark, you're below, then you're considered substantially deficient. So essentially, it takes you 2 times to be substantially deficient, and it takes you 2 times to come off to be appropriately progressing. So when you're at risk, you get the progress monitoring piece, but when you become substantially deficient, so you've missed that benchmark 2 times in a row, that's where a lot of extra things come into play.
Is there a test after this presentation?
There's some people in the room that know this really well. You can sit beside them.
Kind of a cheat sheet that helps us with this,
Yeah.
that helps us, because it's hard to track. Okay, they did what last time? Yeah.
And just to show you how tricky it's been to track is when that November iteration came out with the guidance, that table has grown from here because we've got kids with all different examples of, they came from out of state, didn't test during this period, but now they got this. Okay, so what do you can just tell through that table that's been newly released that they have encountered and had to answer so many questions around this. They have to be able to do that though, because it's going to be high stakes here coming up pretty soon. So again, if you're non-proficient at one point, you still get the universal screener. Now you're being progress monitored weekly. They recommend universal tier with additional intensive or tier 2 or tier 3 support. And parent notice is still just your district adopted process, but they encourage you to still talk to parents about the fact that they've been non-proficient. Okay, I'm not going to go through this. This is if you're substantially deficient, so you've not met it twice. If you are at or above the benchmark, then you only get to move up 1 level. You're only going back to at risk, which I like because that's a way that we're still monitoring those kids. They've been non-proficient for a while. Now we see them as proficient. We're still going to hold your hand a little while and progress monitor you once a week. I like this aspect of it. And then but however, if they're non-proficient still, they're considered substantially deficient. So if you're a kiddo that's substantially deficient, you're going to still have the universal screener 3 times a year, progress monitored weekly. Again, that's a 1-minute probe when I talk about that progress monitoring. Instruction, you're going to get our core, and then you're going to get additional support up above and beyond core in tier 2 or tier 3. And then parent notice, whatever your district's adopted, but in addition to that, a notice specific to parents about how they performed on the universal screening, services that are going to be provided, recommended strategies. And we do that in the way of a letter, and then we bring the parents in. This is coincided with conferences, and we work through a contract with them. Now, so there's lots of questions being answered. What if the parents don't want to sign the contracts? We just make a note, and we put it in their queue. So the tracking of all this is one thing that we have to be mindful of, because we'll just have to watch the system if it will ever tell us those first dates that we've notified parents. Otherwise, we're going to have to be tracking that locally, and that's something we need to be thinking through coming up here. So I've gone through this a little bit already about what happens when a child is substantially deficient. The one thing that I haven't, the last 2 bullets I haven't mentioned yet, that any kid that's substantially deficient needs to be provided 90 minutes of scientific research-based reading instruction. Well, they're really talking about the core. And that's why I made the effort earlier to show you that we have 2.5 hours of literacy instruction. Mary talked about the fact that they're spending probably a good 2 hours doing whole group and small group, and then some kids are getting that extra intervention on top of it. So her intervention is occurring during that 2.5 hours. Some of our other buildings, that extra intervention is occurring outside the 2.5 hours in that intervention block time. And there might be some instances where we have Title I pullout and those things where kids are actually coming out of science or social studies, which we know isn't the best time of day to do that either. So It's happening in different respects across the district or regard. And then reading curriculum requirements. The state hasn't come out necessarily with a lot of guidance around this. I think eventually we'll see some rubrics get pushed out about when you're considering purchasing materials. Here's some things that you should look at for strong curriculum. The other pieces, which these first two really get addressed through the fact that now we're using Iowa Tier. So it requires districts to report universal screening and progress monitoring data to the Iowa Department of Ed. So when we were using DIBELS at the end of last year, we had to upload a file and send it to the state. We were not, we were doing progress monitoring for students, but not necessarily in the Iowa Tier system. So now that we're in Iowa Tier, our FAST assessment information is there automatically for the state to have access to. We also were required to report interventions, and that's sitting in Iowa Tier like I talked about as well. So if you're a district that hasn't come into Iowa Tier yet, you are having to do a lot to still report. The last three we have not seen, at least in this, when it was, our C plan was due September 15th, we did not have to address things specifically. Now, of course, we're always talking about reading proficiency in the CSIP, but we've not specific to buildings or specific to what we're seeing with the FAST yet. Anticipating that could happen this September. We need to review chronic early absenteeism as a part of the CSIP. If more than 15% of the attendance centers students are not proficient by 3rd grade, we have to include it in the CSIP, the strategies that we're going to help that building to be proficient. What I talked to the coaches and elementary principals about a couple of weeks ago is none of this has been released. And so we don't know in the portal where we go to input our information or in the C plan around the CSIP if they're going to open things specific to certain buildings that aren't meeting those benchmarks, or if we'll just be asked to speak to that in general. We don't know what's coming down the pike yet that way. And here's where the fun begins. May 1st, 2017, summer reading program. Each district has to provide an intensive summer reading program for any student exhibiting a substantial deficiency in reading in 3rd grade. That's a caveat I didn't put up there. The standards are being developed by the Iowa Reading Research Center. This fall, we saw a notice of intended action about what summer school might look like, and I know that they got some feedback. So in that initial, and don't hold me to these numbers, they were roughly pushing out, again, please don't hold me to the numbers, about 80 hours of summer school with 90% attendance. I think they've backed off, and the last I heard, to around 75 hours with maybe 85% attendance. And so none of that has officially been released yet. The November guidance said wait for guidance around both the summer school reading program and retention during the summer of 2016. Don't know if that's purposeful, that they waited to next summer to tell us that because of wanting to wait through this legislative session. Perhaps that might be ideal, but we are to hear more information around those pieces. And then the retention begins. We have to notify parents next year for any 3rd graders who's not proficient. And this says by the end of 3rd grade, but again, when we saw that release in November, they're really talking about this winter screening period next year, a year from now. And they, if they do not enroll in an intensive summer reading program and they do not qualify for a good cause exemption. So just because a student was substantially or is substantially deficient next year as a 3rd grader doesn't mean they're automatically retained. If they go to summer school, they're not retained.
If they go to summer school and they're still not proficient at the end of summer school, they go to 4th grade.
They go to 4th grade, yeah.
As long as they show up for the
Yeah.
minimum length of time.
It's just holding people to that high level of attendance and all. Okay, so what are those things that could cause, are good cause exemptions then? The student is a ELL student who's been in the ESL program less than 2 years. Student has an IEP that participation in the assessments is not appropriate. And then the last 3 pieces we have not received guidance on, just this verbiage. The student has demonstrated an acceptable level of performance on an alternative assessment based on scientifically based research. They talk about developing a portfolio, and then, just those 2 pieces. Then this last one is if a student has been retained and previously and received intensive intervention. So if they've been retained before, then we wouldn't retain them again. So we continue to watch webinars that the state pushes out. Between November and December, they had held quite a few, I think around 8. We continue to try to communicate anything that we're learning, but at the state level and the district level, and we're building capacity and using our elementary coaches and principals to push this information out, and they've done a tremendous job this year of rolling out something that, most districts got to spend the year last year doing it in a relatively short amount of time here, so I can't give them enough credit for the work that they've been doing. And then continue to provide professional development just around implementation as we're getting the new information. So with that, I'll entertain questions.
So, as follow-up, Kim looking for the notes here, so could we get the wish list from your perspective?
Absolutely.
On what that would be? And could it be in, here's what we need from, I don't know, maybe it's a district, maybe it's the board. Here's what would be helpful for parents, like we talked about at the A&E, maybe should talk about how do we communicate parent, if we had expectations for reading, how would we go about commercializing that, and talking to the community about it? Maybe there's other national programs we could tie into, I don't know, something, Brian, but it might be something for A&E to think about. How would we, is there things we need from our community so parents can't do the reading with the kids? Could the community fill that void? And maybe we take an at-risk approach to that. And let's come back and talk that a little more. Is there things we need from legislature? And that would be the political wing of the organization that we would have to go work. You know what I mean? So think about all sorts, and I think this will be true inside this conversation for math, educational opportunity. You know what I mean? How do we get everybody tied in to driving our reading proficiency? If you think about engaging the community, then you start thinking about, that's what Phil was talking about, do we have the right locations around the community, or do we have library support?
Well, I think we've got 16 months before we're in a position where we're telling parents their kids are going to summer school. And
Except that, Phil, it's that winter benchmark that's
No,
gonna be
no, I
determined.
understand.
That's 12.
No, I agree with you, Mary. No, the clock is ticking, and
Yeah.
and I think we've got to really look at this summer as an opportunity to get ahead of it. And I really feel, opportunities for students in the summer are limited. And I've had conversations with people in law enforcement that they're concerned that when you have only the public library downtown as kind of a source and everybody's kind of sucked into downtown, it'd be nice if we had other opportunities around the community. And I would really like to see if we could get Southeast Junior High Library opened up during the summer for students to go in there and do things, have that as an option. Absolutely, in our elementaries as well. And does it mean tapping into our community volunteers, retired teachers and such to help us with staffing it? I think that we got to look at that opportunity. The more we can get them to recognize that neighborhood school as their source, they come in, they can come and have some things here, and if you have some volunteers on staff to help them with that, I think we've got to explore it, we've got to make it work.
One thing I know from conferences, but I'm a second grade teacher, so this is the first group of kids this is the first group of kids that hopefully won't be retained, but may be retained. So we talked to Amy about this at our PLC meeting too, our data meeting, that parents, one positive, and I frankly don't see a lot positive from this legislation, but there's one thing that I would say is good, is that parents took it when we were talking about proficiency, and they took it much more seriously. And so I think, and we have a lot of families that really want to do what's best, but they might not be literate in first language or second language. So I think as far as timing goes, this summer, I'm kind of speaking for our experience with our second grade parents, it's a really good time because nobody wants to see their kid retain,
Absolutely.
and nobody, I would say our families are doing a lot, but if we could have some opportunities that were not punitive yet, or that didn't involve being retained, because we know what stigma comes from that, I think parents would be on board, because they want to do something before this happens.
Absolutely.
So kind of the timing is right, I would
Sure.
say.
So we gotta get on this now,
Right.
basically. It can't even be till, can't even wait till a year from now for that winter mark.
The junior and senior high libraries and teacher librarians did the I'm Booked program over the last couple of summers to try to really get books into the hands of kids without worrying so much about if they have 2 and are they gonna lose them? You know, they take
And how long
20.
are they out?
How long are they out?
Yeah,
They
right.
did a midsummer, come back, get more books, and I think that could be a model that maybe expands out to the
Right, well,
elementary
and
level.
here again, we're supposedly a community of literature.
Right.
We I think working with the city
Mhm.
that way, definitely working with Iowa City Public Library
Yeah.
as well. And, the different municipalities that are within our district, and also the county. I mean, I think we should, it's gonna affect everyone in the community
Mhm.
going forward if we are graduating students that aren't
Yeah.
proficient.
We had those remember you did a video, right? Or
Yep.
reading, yeah. I mean, I would say as board members too, if you want to lead on it, it was a really nice video Steve did of a reading initiative.
3 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and put it out there. I mean, I think it'd be great if every board member had a favorite book and did some reading and talked about that. I mean, I think if you want to establish like it as a initiative at the board level and say how important this is, I think you guys could really. It was a neat little thing they put together and put it out there and sent it out.
We have
It was
a
on our
big
YouTube page.
dip in the fall too. I think a lot of the schools that we're talking about that have that inverted triangle, and if the students are not proficient in the fall and the winter, there you go. And we see that trend that, once they get back here in the swing of things, or they start to go up.
Right.
But we need to we can't have them take this giant dip over the summer because
Try
they
and
it's
eliminate
harder
the
to-
summer dip.
Yep.
And
The other thing is getting books in kids' hands at
Yeah.
home. So coming here is great, but we try our very best in family nights. We make sure every child has a book that is theirs. They don't have to return it, because we have a lot of folks who don't have any books at home to read. And I bet most of us had a book at home that we read over and over and over again when we were younger, and that's how we became readers. So that's the other focus that we've tried to have here at Twain, is how do we get books in the homes, and they are their books, that they don't have to worry about bringing them back.
Did you get that too, Ken? Books in the homes?
And it's so exciting. I mean, Beth gets a lot of books for family nights, and
We
that
assign
has
them.
just as much of an impact on the data that you see as any of our interventions probably.
well, maybe we need to have some summertime family nights at the school. Activities like that to draw everybody in, because it's not only, parents are the first teachers of their children. And maybe we've got to push that too.
So what are all the enablers to make the events a day, and have the supports around the community that
Right.
it's localized?
Yeah, we'd love to be a partner with that too, as an association. Books and homes. I think you could have some really cool initiatives like that you can get a lot of community members, teachers, staff, administrators really working along those lines. I think
And this
just
community
figuring
is
out which
amazing.
couple you want to do.
I mean, the church down here has done so much for us with our bags. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm just blown away by the people who come in here and want to help in any way possible. We have some great relationships with people, and I think they would jump all over it. We've been under construction.
Sure.
So last summer, I got my little corner, and that was about it all summer long. But we were very excited about what this summer might bring for
You might be
possibilities.
able to find some nifty community partnerships too, because Pearson is Read Across America Day. And one of the things that they do with that is, it goes back to the point Mary said before, they pick a book each year. It's usually one you would recognize. I remember they did Corduroy, and then they make sure that all the kids get a copy of that book. So again, we're increasing their home library, but maybe more importantly than that, we're getting a lot of volunteers from Pearson who come into the school who hopefully form a little bit more enduring relationship with teachers and students and schools in particular.
I think too, if we think about transportation as a hindrance for some of our families, we have Hilltop, we have, even if we could get people to go out and have story time or something there, or have something at Lakeside.
Exactly, and that was one of the things in the discussion is that when you have all these nice events going down at the city public library, that's great for those that can make it, but if you can disperse that in the community, make it easier so a Twain child can walk here and have a story time here, you just magnify the opportunities.
I don't mean to revert back, but I think this is important for you guys to know. So remember I said we're receiving about $120,000 in funding each year for this. And you can spend those dollars on any of those 23 requirements that I touched most on. So when we are faced next year, we've purchased like the fast finders, some of the training, that Passy screener I talked about. We've used some of that money. I think roughly about half has been going out to about $60,000 out to the summer schools that we've already been running. But when you think about next year and having to have staff hired and they want the ratio to be, I think we'll eventually see through the summer guidance, about a ratio of 1 to 15. The other thing is curriculum that we'll perhaps or possibly need to purchase for that summer school, depending on how much gets dictated to us. But the other piece that we saw in the November guidance was if you would typically provide transportation for the student, you would be doing that again. And so think about, are we gonna have 20 sites? If we're not having 20 sites, we're already gonna have transportation cost if we have 20 sites. If we don't have 20 sites, think about the transportation cost associated with that even more. So those are just the other things I would have you be thinking about as well, the impact potentially on the general fund as we head into third grade retention.
I apologize if you already answered this, but worst case scenario, how many kids are gonna get caught up in this summer school?
Well, if you roughly look at some of our statistics with, 70%, 75% of our kids being proficient, 250, 300 kids.
Steve, I know you gotta leave, right? Thoughts on next steps, or group thoughts on next steps, or?
Yeah, a couple of them, and I'm going to jump right into the legislative fray with it. We've been really pushing our state legislators, who have been very supportive of the idea that the state should stop dumping unfunded mandates on it.
Yeah.
We're not, as a matter of fact, we're supportive of the idea of summer instruction. I would love it if they would provide universal funding for summer school. But if they want to require us to have kids in summer school, they need to fund it. And they also need to think about the kids, because if you're a struggling reader, telling you that you have to come to school for 6 weeks and work on literacy 3 hours a day is not the way to encourage kids to love reading. The way to do it is to make sure that there are opportunities for the remedial work that we need them to do in literacy, but also some enrichment activities. I don't think none of you were on the board at the time, but when we were working with ACT and Pearson and we were first doing summer school, one of the things that we did when we worked with them was to really look at where some of the deficits lay with kids, and so much of it's contextual understanding. And I can remember being at Wood when the kids got back from going to the Niabi Zoo, and one of the young ladies saying she never really understood what an elephant was, because the only elephants she knew were in Babar, and she didn't realize how big they were until she actually saw one. And so if you think about how kids read and how they build their mental file cabinet and how they file that type of information away, if they don't have the contextual understanding, it's hard to do. And we can provide a lot of those opportunities in summer school, but not if all we do is 3 hours of remedial reading every day.
Yeah, right.
And so we're going to burn the kids out. They're not going to like reading. It's going to be a penalty for them instead of a reward. So what we need more support from the state to do real summer school for these kids. Yes, in small groups. Yes, with remedial reading. But yes, with opportunities for contextual understanding. Also understand a lot of these kids have gaps in math. So where's the opportunity for us to do that with math too? So it's not wrong, but it's not enough. So if we really want to make it work, that's how we make it work. Because the other thing is, and Amy and Matt and I have talked about this, So let's say it's 300 kids. What about the 301st, 302nd, 303rd that just tripped over the bar? So they are not going to be required under this to take that, but they're still going to have skill gaps and deficits as they enter 4th grade. That's not acceptable. So where's the opportunity again for a more universal funding stream that really allows us to do true summer school? Phil was talking about the learning gap before. How do we make sure that we don't let that slide happen over the summer, so what these kids leave with in the spring, they come back with in the fall?
Do you have any sense of how likely the legislature is going to be amenable to the suggestion that they need either more money or less requirements?
At a minimum, from the Just Fund, which you've asked us to do, I'm not getting a lot of positive vibes on that. I'm hearing more about let's kick the can down the road and not require implementation immediately. That I think might be something that comes up earlier in the session, just because a lot of districts have expressed similar concerns that we have. The bad news with that is then we're going to lose the opportunity to do any summer instruction in terms of a funding standpoint. So it's not good either way from that sense. But I have a feeling that they're more likely to kick it down the road than they are to fund it.
We do have the ability to file for a waiver next year. We don't know what that waiver will look like or any kind of requirements. If we have to show hardship, but there is a 1-year deal where you can apply for a waiver.
I know you gotta go, but let's talk how we operationalize this conversation we just had about, how do we create a plan, how do we reach out to the community, and all that good stuff. So Amy, are you done?
I am.
So what's your thoughts on specifically the African American proficiency gap?
Can I interrupt for just 1 second before I leave? I just want to say to the board that we had a big challenge today at West High School, and I can't say enough about how the students responded at school in terms of doing what they needed to do to get out of the school, get on the bus. They had to sit in buses in the Hall of Fame parking lot while they waited for next steps from us. When they found out that they had to go to the HTRC and unload from the buses and go into the turf there, they were phenomenally well behaved. You had 2,000 kids. All the West staff was there, and the kids were just great. Then when we finally figured out next steps in terms of getting kids back for their cars, getting them back for their buses, they did exactly what we asked them to do when we asked them to do it. There were 0 problems with 2,000 kids in kind of an organized chaos situation. Durham was a wonderful partner for us. When we said we need buses at the school, they had 30 more buses than we needed show up in order to get the kids out as quick as possible. And then the university, I can't say enough about that. They immediately opened up the parking lot at the Hall of Fame when we needed to get them inside so they had access to bathrooms and could make the phone calls that they needed. And the rest of that, they opened up the HTRC for us and got us in there. And so it was not an ideal situation on a day with temperatures like we had today, but everybody rose to the occasion and really commendable. And food service did a great job making sure the elementary kids on the west side still got to eat, because that's our production kitchen over there, and they weren't allowed in there either.
Wow.
That's what you requested.
Good. Thanks, Amy.
So,
Thanks.
Go ahead. You had a question, yeah.
African American performance, getting after, what's the gap analysis, where we get,
Yeah, so again, I would just go to those 3 areas. And the thing I would say about our multi-tiered system of supports, or when we assess our students, is, we understand that they most likely may fit into a subgroup, but we're programming for kids, whether all non-proficient kids. So when they first don't meet that benchmark, we're progress monitoring them, we're providing interventions. I just think it's important to think about what are the reasons that our African American kids, our ELL kiddos, what is it that we can do to help provide different instruction, more robust instruction? Is it the kind of reading material? Is it not engaging enough? Is it not make sense with their life experiences? We want them to have access to a lot of different text as well. But I don't know that I have the answer yet, but I definitely know it's on our radar. But I do feel good that any kid that's not proficient is being looked at and either progress monitored and or provided an intervention. And I think that that's one thing that's important to recognize, that we know that is important and all kids deserve that.
let's just keep that conversation up then too, then, because we need to get to the root, or, you know what I mean? I agree, if we help all of our kids that have a gap or at risk, it's great, but at some point we just gotta, is our plan sufficient?
And I think you take it back to some of the work we're doing with Dr. Javis. And we, you heard about the PSYOP strategy for EL students tonight. We really know, when Amy shows that tier, back to core instruction. So if we have a significant group of our students that are not being successful, then we really need to take a hard look at that core instruction and figure out, is that core instruction working for all of those groups? Because I've heard her say several times, we're not going to intervene our way out of a problem. So, we can't, some kids need intervention, but we also can't intervene our way out of everything. So we really have to get at that core instruction. And so whether it's PSYOP strategies or whether it's those culturally responsive methods in our classrooms, I mean, some of that's got to be incorporated or core for all those skills.
Maybe that's the plan. Like, so PSYOP, I'm pretty, to what degree is that rolled out across the district? Because I heard maybe
I don't have a great feel for it. I know that we've
It's
offered.
gonna get there, right?
Yeah.
It's
So-
gonna increase.
Yeah, it's going to increase a lot. Yep.
I think there's like 5 schools that have had 2 years. I think almost 100% of our staff have all gone through PSYOPs.
It goes back to PD, because it's been 4 full days of training. So to think about how we would ever roll out 4 full days of training, we don't even simply have the hours in our PD if we used 100% of our PD hours during the year to provide PSYOP. So when Matt and I look at how that training has been funded, we're looking at that those TQSA dollars to do that, and we're going to be limited in how much extras we offer above PSYOP just simply because of the dollars. We've had a discussion with our admin council today. I think there's so many things coming down around ELL now that it was important to bring them up to speed, and that includes the U.S. Department of Justice letter to all districts across the nation, then the state receiving some citations in a site visit that they received from the feds and the impact on school districts. And then because we haven't been meeting certain proficiencies over the last few years, we are considered to be in corrective action year 4, and so that has implications for our district on professional development. So next year, PD-wise, just for ELL, and I think it's a focus where we need to go anyway, we're going to have 2 requirements, one because federal citation to the state, and the other because of being in corrective action year 4. But with the state, they have to provide ELP standards training to ELL teachers this year. They're rolling out 3 of the first 6 modules. They are about 5.5 hours total. Anyone that teaches ELL students then next year has to see those same 5.5 hours of modules. There are three different modules, and they have to take a test after they're done with each. So there's 5.5 hours of PD that we know we're going to have wrapped up time. In addition to that, because we're in corrective action, we need to start planning professional development. There's about 4 different areas. The first area is just building foundational awareness around our ELL students. Then in the second year, your next choice is providing sheltered instruction, essentially PSYOP. And so it's kind of forcing our hand, but when you look at our explosion in our ELL numbers, the fact that they're non-proficient, the fact that we're in corrective action because we're non-proficient not only on Iowa assessments, but also on that IELDA, soon to be ALPA 21 test. It just kind of all is kind of created the perfect storm, but it's also then forcing our hand with how we use our PD hours next year. And I know Matt and I talk a lot about having access to staff, and right there you're probably talking about 8-9 hours of ELL PD just coming right off at the top of our PD hours.
We haven't figured this out. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
The ELL, we haven't figured it out the very best way. We tried pulling kids out, but that, we have 83 kids being pulled out. Well, they're usually the same kids that are also getting additional reading instruction, and they're getting probably in that math group, and so they're away from their peers. So right now we're really working on trying to get those ELL teachers to be in there, to help with that vocabulary as it's being taught, to support this, the student in that core instruction. That I think we can do, except for our newcomers. I just got a sweet little newcomer this morning, or this afternoon, who registered. She can count to 10, but she doesn't know really what it means, and that's pretty much it. She knows her name. 1st grade. She's going to be tested on this. Okay, in what, 2 weeks or a week? So she's a brand new learner of English, and so how do we best help support her and just learning about school? She's from Tanzania, I think she's here. Yeah, Tanzania. So she was just amazed at this school. She just got here. And so there's so much for her to learn socially and academically, and so. You know, should that be a student who really has a half a day of full support, you know, with teachers to learn that? So we haven't figured it out. It's a huge.
And it's
huge
K-12.
job.
Same happens
Yeah.
at the secondary schools. Yeah, you
Yeah.
get someone in mid-year, you know, from a variety of life situations. So a lot of PSYOP training. We have sheltered courses at all of our secondary schools now, junior high and senior high. And so any teacher, I'm PSYOP trained. I co-taught with an ELL teacher, American Studies.
Yep, a lot of
Yeah.
visuals, a lot of gestures, a
Yeah.
lot of peer helping. We have a Swahili speaker in the room, which is a gift because
Yeah.
now they can communicate over what's being taught. But it's quite a challenge.
We've asked for the ELL to be a topic on the March Education Committee agenda, and that happens to be at Alexander, so kill a couple birds with two stones. New ELL programming out there, new building to see, so.
And one thing I think was interesting today during administrative council was they were asked, so there's a target from the state as far as what proficiency is, and nobody in the state is meeting it with the ELL populations. No district. So it isn't that we're the only district, which is interesting, but yet we're now put on a corrective action plan. So it isn't just Iowa City or our big districts that have large populations. They haven't figured it out across the district. Not that I'm trying to make excuses, but we're not the only ones out there.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting that you've set a target that nobody's reached. Aren't we supposed to have a bell curve? But anyway, just FYI.
Yeah.
A lot of work to be done.
Truly.
A lot of reading.
Well, thanks again, Amy, and input from everybody. This was the good vibe buzz I had after the Twain thing sort of dissipated during the during the weight of the other things. But you know, if we can get something going that really does get the community involved, and we all dig in for it, perhaps some things will improve. I worry too about what the state's doing. I mean, it's pretty clear that Houghton Mifflin, Pearson, some other people are willing to take entire Department of Eds and have educational conferences in St. Croix. I mean, these companies do this mess, and then they say, "Well, congratulations on purchasing $8 million of our stuff." Whoa, $1,000 a box. Holy mother. I mean, it's just really. I mean, this is just piracy. And it goes on in districts across the country because, I don't know why, because we put up with it, I think, to some extent. But there's a decreasing number of power companies. And it's unfortunate that we have to deal with them. This isn't a Bernie Sanders speech. I'm just saying. It's like the difference between you want satellite TV, we get Dish, or you got two choices. What is that? And if you want cable in Iowa City, you got none. But I'm concerned, teachers, that you get the best materials possible. And it shouldn't be something that, that the secret conversation is, you're going to do this because, just to call it what it is, because Amy and Matt have been told by somebody else at the DE that this is what we're going to do. And if you don't like it and it's not working, then we need to know. And everybody ought to be brave enough to speak up and just say, this stuff's expensive and it's not working. Rather than the state says it. And then we can, have any trouble telling the State Department of Ed why it's not working. We have sufficient intelligence and ability to collect data to show why it's not working. But you don't need to be boondoggled. I mean, the place where the rubber hits the road is in the classroom. And you need to have the best stuff that you can get to do what you need to do. And if there's a boondoggle in there, then we ought to face up to it. So,
I think Amy had a great point though, when you can buy the best materials, but they're just good materials unless you teach your teachers to use them and do them with fidelity. And that's a huge piece of, we can buy them, but then how do we train our teachers and coach them to implement them with fidelity? Because are they not working because we're not doing them correctly? We all do the best we can. And so that is a huge piece as you move forward, is the PD that all of our teachers need.
Again,
That's what you hear from teachers the most is time.
Yeah.
I think. And time, not just to get the specific training, but time to let them work with their teams, that they have some freedom and respect that, okay, now we gotta let this process a little, we gotta play around with it a little bit. I
Yeah.
think that time piece is we hear
Well-
the very most from, especially our
Yeah.
elementary folks, is
Yeah.
just we need time to do this. you know.
There's just more time with you.
I know, that's what's
There
tough.
isn't
I agree.
Questions, comments, points? Good to go?
okay. Steve's gonna postpone the E ESSA update till next month, as he says it's not time sensitive anyway. It is, after all, the federal government who's in a hurry. So agenda setting.
Can we continue the conversation on this, engaging the community in
Yep.
strategic plans / reading? You can wordsmith whatever it is, but
Sure.
Discussion on facility utilization and then.
Yep.
I'll chat with Steve a little more on how we,
Okay.
like, operationalize, I'd say this, but how do we get this,
Right,
we
Yep.
need a reading champion or,
right.
Working on ideas on how to really make it work for the families that aren't necessarily going to the public library
Yeah.
reading thing for the summer and whatever else. We'd
Right.
be happy to provide insights on
Please.
Yep.
what our parents want,
Absolutely.
what they do.
That's what we're after.
Whatever works.
Please.
I would also like to have a conversation next month about vocational and tech training and interest promotion. Matt's been involved in some conversations with me and different ones with Phil and some members of the community about how to start getting some educational interest as early as 8th grade, finding a way to get other parts of the community, building trades, other groups involved in just saying, here are some career development paths, and just start to have that conversation. So at least in part because, again, along with the reading thing, there's some concern that they're going to be, we have more students in the district and decreasing opportunities for them to find something constructive to do during the summer, especially about age 14 and up. Yeah, we did hear from somebody in the police department recently about some concern about how hot things could get this summer if the kids don't find something to do. So finding, using the community to find a way to do that as a part of the conversation I'd like to have, at least with an educational component. It's not just, we're not just looking for toys and games, we're looking for constructive paths that kids can follow in the
Well,
future.
And something we might throw in there too would be discussion with Habitat for Humanity. I know they're gonna have a project this summer.
Oh, yeah.
And seeing how we can at least alert our students to that opportunity during the summer where they could get some construction experience and everything that way.
Yep.
Are we gonna get that report out on the maker spaces and things like that was that scheduled for this one or was that further down?
It's the maker spaces.
We had talked about not doing it this one, but potentially the next one, so if
Right,
you'd like
if,
us to do that.
if,
next
if that
education
isn't too
committee.
much,
Yeah.
with that, the maker spaces is space at the schools for like robotics club and different clubs to actually work collaboratively and do some projects. I'm also interested in along the same lines as having open library time at our schools, open shop time, especially with the facility at West High and wherever in the district we might have a facility that would lend itself to that. So students in the summer, if they are looking for an outlet, if they're not into basketball or reading and want to work with their hands, if we would have sites available where they could do that. And if it requires getting community volunteers to help with that, start early enough so we can line those people up.
Maybe we can talk about that with the, roll it into that other conversation.
Yeah, oh
Right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't see any
If
any
that's okay,
separation
unless-
among any of
unless you
these
think
things
that's too much.
particularly.
Are we
Well,
at
I think that's
Alexander
enough.
next time?
I've got Alexander down, I had Alexander down for February,
I
but
think you have the older, I think you have the
I think
older
I do
calendar.
too, and I couldn't find a new one.
I think
I
it's
almost
Alexander
called
March.
you.
I can send it to you.
I think city,
Oh, good.
I think city's February.
Yeah, well, that's what I had
Yeah.
down. Is that not right? Cities next
No,
month?
he's right.
Okay.
You're right, yeah.
And
All
then
right.
base topic of Little Hawk Advisory Program.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you want to do maker spaces there, or you want to fit it with another secondary one if we have that presentation going on, John and Little Hawk Advisory, or what do you want to?
I'll tell John he's got 10 minutes. Or even better, it'd be to get a couple teachers in there to talk about how advisory is working, so.
I think it's a nice conversation to tie in with that career and
Yeah.
technical conversation, so.
Okay.
You may just want to swag, like, we're gonna spend 15 minutes,
Yep.
15 minutes, and then we try to manage ourselves to it. Or
Yep. Indeed.
Do our best at least.
Anything else? Anybody's got at the moment? Thanks for attending, everybody. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
So moved?
So moved.
Second? All in favor, say aye. Anybody staying to go do the...